Hello and welcome to another episode of 10 Minute Teaching. I'm Ben Campbell and today we're going to be talking about the Shakespeare play Macbeth. We're going to go through three main elements of the play today. We're going to talk about the plot, that is what happens in the play. We're going to talk also about the context of the play, that is the background information about the play, when it was written and so forth. And finally, we're going to talk about those key themes in the play. This is going to be a general overview, so don't expect absolutely every single nitty-gritty detail. It is, after all, only 10 minutes. But we are going to do most of the key information that you're going to need to know about this play, Macbeth. Starting off with the plot. Now, as I say, this is going to be a general overview. I'm not going to include absolutely every single tiny detail, but I am going to give you the main plot points of Macbeth. Let's start off with the beginning of the play. The play opens with some spooky witches on a heath talking about a character called Macbeth. Guess what? That's the main character of the play. And they make a prediction when they finally meet Macbeth. They tell him that he is going to become a thane. That is a Scottish term for kind of like a lord or a duke. The thane of a place called Cawdor. And they also tell him that after he becomes the thane of Cawdor, he's then going to go on to become the king. Very spooky for Macbeth, who is actually a servant of the current king, a guy called King Duncan. He initially is a bit spooked out by these witches, doesn't believe them really, but he then learns mere moments later that in fact King Duncan has just made him the thane of Cawdor. And that gets Macbeth thinking maybe these witches actually had something going about them. Maybe if he has become the thane of Cawdor, maybe he can become the king. There's just one problem. There's already a king, King Duncan. So Macbeth starts to think about what he might need to do to get rid of Duncan. So after making Macbeth the thane of Cawdor, Duncan decides he wants to have a big celebration. They've just won a big important battle and Macbeth was a key part of winning that battle. So they all decide to go back to Macbeth's castle and have a big old celebration. Back at the castle, Macbeth meets his wife, Lady Macbeth, and she hears about this prophecy that the witches gave that Macbeth might well become the next king, and she also is very keen for that to happen. So keen, in fact, that she agrees with Macbeth that they should kill Duncan. Now, there's then lots of deliberation in the play. Shakespeare goes into loads of detail about whether or not it is right for Macbeth to kill Duncan. Macbeth has all sorts of speeches and internal monologues debating whether or not it's the right thing to do, but ultimately he decides that he will do it. Macbeth then becomes the king, but it doesn't stop there because Macbeth then becomes very worried that exactly what he did to Duncan is going to happen to him, and he starts to try and consolidate his power by getting rid of some people that he believes to be a threat to his throne. Predominantly, he's afraid of one of his best friends, a guy called Banquo, and he's also afraid of another thane, a guy called Macduff. So he decides to do what he does best and get rid of these guys by killing them. This is compounded by the fact that Macbeth goes to see the witches once more, and they give him another set of prophecies, this time warning him that Macduff might well be the man to kill him. Ultimately, Macbeth manages to kill Banquo, but Macduff manages to escape. Not only does Macduff escape death, but he manages to go over to England and meet up with Malcolm. Now, Malcolm is the eldest son of the late King Duncan. Malcolm has been in conversations with the English king and has managed to get a few English soldiers to come with him so that he can go back to Scotland, kill Macbeth, boot Macbeth off the throne, and install himself as the rightful heir. Now, while all this is going on in England with Macduff and Malcolm back in Scotland, things are taking a turn for the worse. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are both in the throes of madness. They're falling into insanity due to the guilt that both of them feel about their hand in the various murders that they have committed. It is so bad for Lady Macbeth, in fact, that she actually commits suicide. But upon hearing this, Macbeth has no feelings about that whatsoever. He also has fallen into a deep madness, one that grips him and makes him unable to feel any emotion except his lust for power. In fact, another prophecy from those dastardly witches makes Macbeth believe that he's actually invincible, being told that no one who was born of a woman is going to be able to kill him. In the last part of the play, the climactic battle, Malcolm and Macduff bring their forces from both Scotland and England and they attack Macbeth's castle. Macbeth comes out to face Macduff in one-on-one combat, where it is revealed that Macduff was not born normally. He was born of a caesarean section, therefore kind of getting around the witch's prophecy that no one born of a woman would be able to kill Macbeth. They face each other, and Macduff is able to take revenge for the death of his family by killing Macbeth. And they then install Malcolm as the new king, and Scotland is all right all over again. Let's talk next then about the context of the play, that is the background information about Macbeth. We'll start off with some historical context. Now, like most of Shakespeare's plays, Macbeth is actually not an original story made up by Shakespeare. He got the idea from an older story which he then adapted. There are some interesting differences between the original story of Macbeth and the one that we find in Shakespeare's play. The main difference being that in the original story, King Duncan is actually presented as a pretty bad ruler, and we're actually meant to kind of sympathise with Macbeth in wanting to overthrow Duncan. In Shakespeare's play, that's absolutely not the case. Duncan is presented as this wonderful king who does absolutely everything right and is basically perfect in almost every way, whereas Macbeth is definitely presented as the villainous character for wanting to overthrow him. The next important piece of context is political, and that's probably the most important piece of context that you should be aware of for Macbeth, and that is the context in which the play was made by Shakespeare. You see, a few years before Shakespeare wrote Macbeth, a very important political change had happened in England. The previous Queen, Queen Elizabeth I, had died, and the King of Scotland, King James VI of Scotland, had actually just become also the King of England. Scottish king becoming the King of England, big political change in the makeup of the English political system, and we can kind of see Macbeth as a reaction to that political event. It's clearly meant to be a little bit of propaganda perhaps for King James. It's all about Scottish heroes, it's all about the rightful king, and that kind of plays into probably what King James would have wanted a play to be about. The final important piece of context is religious. You'll notice that in the play, the witches are very key to the plot of the play, as well as being a really spooky addition by Shakespeare, which almost certainly attracted some of the popular crowds. You see, in the 16th and 17th century, suspicion about anti-Christian ideas such as witchcraft was still very prevalent. In fact, King James himself actually had a book that he wrote about witchcraft and hunting witches. So these witch characters were very much in vogue at the time. Shakespeare, a very popularist writer, would have loved to have drawn some crowds with his depiction of these spooky witches. Finally, let's talk about some of the key themes in the play. Now, there are many themes that we could discuss when it comes to Macbeth, but I think three are the most important that we should be aware of. The first really important theme that we're going to notice in this play is the theme of guilt. That is, the guilt particularly that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth feel. This guilt eats away at them from the very first murder they commit against King Duncan, and it seeps into all the other murders that they commit as the play progresses. And in fact, by the end of the play, it is the feeling which causes Lady Macbeth to be driven to suicide and madness, and it's the thing that causes Macbeth to eventually fall to insanity as well. This guilt eats away at them throughout the course of the play, and it's a really interesting exploration in this play of the power of guilt. Another key theme would be the idea of power and ambition. We can kind of link these two ideas together. Power in this play can be seen to corrupt you unless you are supposed to be wielding it. Duncan and Malcolm are set up as the proper kings of Scotland. They are able to wield that power effectively. But as soon as Macbeth becomes the king, everything starts to fall apart. And we see that Macbeth's ambition, in fact, his over-ambition for this position which he doesn't deserve and isn't right for, that is what ultimately causes his tragic downfall. A final and related theme to the last one would be kingship, this idea of who should be the rightful king. Malcolm and Duncan are clearly, as I said, set up to be the rightful rulers of Scotland, and their rule is often described and related to ideas of light and purity and being curing, whereas Macbeth's rule is often described as being dark and full of disease. Shakespeare's clearly trying to show that some people are meant to be rulers and some people are not. And this clearly ties into our idea of the political context in which he was writing, where he's trying to say that King James, who's recently taken over as the King of England, is the rightful king and that we should accept that. So these are our three main themes here. There are obviously many, many others. We could look at the role of women in the play, such as with Lady Macbeth, and there are many, many other things that we could discuss. But for me, these are the three which stand out as the most important in an initial overview of what the play Macbeth is all about. Okay guys, that is going to be our 10-minute introduction to the play Macbeth. As I said, we haven't gone over absolutely every single detail here, but I hope this gives you a bit of a head start to your study of the play. Today we've focused on three key areas: the plot of Macbeth, the key bits of context or background information, and finally, some of the key themes that we're seeing active in the play. As I've said, this is absolutely not everything that this play has to offer, and I hope that as though this gives you a good start to the play, you're also going to be inspired to go and do some further study and find out more of the secrets that this play has in store. It's a wonderful play, probably my favourite of Shakespeare's. Maybe that's just because it's so short, but it's full of violence and guilt and all sorts of heart-wrenching emotions, and I hope that you enjoy it as much as I have if you go on and study it in more detail. Alright guys, all that's left for me to say is thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have more things that you'd like me to teach you in 10 minutes, then leave some ideas in the comments section below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.